All right. Hello and welcome to The Natural Capitalist. This is the podcast where we answer your questions about natural capital markets. So that's questions about things like carbon, wildlife, timber, water, recreation, and so much more. Ideally, we can answer those questions in 5 minutes or less. And we are your hosts, Max and myself, Zach, founders of NCX, the Natural Capital Exchange. Max, what's our question of the week?
All right, looking here in the Natural Capitalist mailbox, and it looks like it's Steven from South Carolina. He says, I'm looking at a carbon program for my land that seems pretty good, but they're offering two ways to get paid. There's a fixed rate per year or revenue sharing. How should I pick?
Ooh, all right. Good one. So, to make this really simple, it's always easier for me if I make it concrete, Max. So let's assume for the moment that it's a tree planting project. So, you've got a field, you're going to plant some trees in it. You're going to agree to a 60-year term, and you're offered either $10 per acre per year over that 60-year term, or 25% of the revenue from credits sold off that agreement. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I always think about how these things go off the rails. Like, what are the risks here? And I think for a project like this on the revenue share, the two key risks I'd think about are volume risk and price risk. So Zach, talk to us about the volume of carbon credits that are going to get generated from this thing. Like, where can that go horribly wrong?
Sure. Well, we're talking about trees here, and so growing matters and staying alive matters. And not all trees stay alive, and not all trees grow at the rate that we wish that they would. So, over the course of the 60 years, if you're confronted with drought, if you're confronted with flooding, if you're confronted with fires, or anything that's going to speed up or slow down the growth or kill those trees, you need to understand how you're exposed to that, whether you're at risk of of total loss on the project or just loss of revenue because the whoever you're working with has a projection for how much carbon they think can be grown. It's going to be based on where you're located, what soils you've got. And so really making sure you understand and are comfortable with those projections and the prospect that they might not be right. The volume they hope might be much more or potentially less than what you actually create.
Yeah, and
And
the other side of this is the price side, right?
that's
And
right.
like this is a classic commodity price kind of question, right? Even in mature markets like wheat and soybeans and stuff, right? This is it's complicated to predict what the future prices of things are going to be. But if you were really smart about that, you should probably be making more money on the commodities markets in Chicago than thinking about planting your own trees. But carbon is even more volatile than that, right? It's a new market. There's tremendous variability in the prices that are going to happen. Anybody that tells you they know what the price of carbon is going to be next year is lying to you. Let alone 60 years from now, like you're
Uh,
talking about in
that's
the terms of this contract.
That's right. And it's already changed so much. I mean, even in the last 2 years, we've seen, price increases for things like tree planting and decrease for projects that are, protecting existing forests. So right now we're seeing ranges in prices on tree planting removal from 25 to something like $50. People, they look at there are forecasts that you can look at that have hopeful projections of $150 per ton, but that's not guaranteed. And so obviously you'd be disappointed if prices go to the moon and you chose the fixed rate. But what you need to understand is that future price could include the number zero. And that would, that's
And then
just the
you'd be
risk that
very
you're running.
happy that you picked the fixed rate one,
Sure.
right?
So Max, there's another one that springs to mind that kind of rolls up both volume and price, which is sort of the rules around how a carbon credit is even calculated. How do
Yeah.
you think about that?
I mean, these rules are in constant flux even right now, determining how many carbon credits are in a tree and over what period of time and all this stuff. That it's changed even in the last 2 years, and so that's going to affect both the volume and the price. But that's not to say that the fixed rate thing doesn't
No,
have its own risks either, right? And for that in particular, things like inflation really matter, right?
that's right. Yeah, I mean, $10 in 2024 is not going to feel the same as $10 in 2054. So just making sure that you're looking at the contract and that you understand how adjustments will be made, or if they're not made, that you know that and you're comfortable with it. But there's a piece of some of these contracts that I think we've seen, Max, where it allows for landowners to adjust their answer or change their answer to this question periodically. So it's not just what you choose today is this, that's what you're locked in for 60 years. And I think what we've seen those at like 5 and 10 year intervals.
Yeah, and having that option to change is really valuable, especially over long periods of time. I mean, the other risk you need to think about with long periods of time, right, is that this company might go bust too. I mean, like a lot of these are relatively
Right.
young companies; it's a very young market, so that's something that you gotta keep in mind too, and know too, like what happens to your carbon rights in that case. Like, can you resell that carbon? Like, that's a question you should ask when you're thinking about this stuff.
Right. No, that's a great point, Max. But really, for Stephen, for anybody looking and considering these kinds of questions, the answer really comes down to your risk tolerance and what your preferences are. Your answer isn't going to be the same necessarily as your neighbors. And really, here at NCX, like our objective is to fairly lay out all of the risks and potential costs and benefits to these programs to help make sure that you're making an informed decision as you consider engagement in these markets and growing your natural capital portfolio. But
Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for the questions, Stephen, and please send your questions over to us. Look forward to answering again next week. Take care.